I'm with Eylon Levy, co-founder of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. Now, Eylon, what is the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office?
Israel is the only country in the world that finds itself constantly under attack, having to explain and justify itself all the time to everyone. And therefore, we've decided on a brand new concept of citizen spokespeople. You've heard of citizen journalists, people who take their phones and go to document critical events. We're citizen spokespeople, ordinary people. People have normal jobs who will go on camera to defend our country to the world. Israel is fighting for its life now against Iran and its proxy armies on 7 different fronts. Not only that, but a wave of misinformation and vicious propaganda against Israel. And so I'm building a team that will do a live briefing every day on all social media platforms to break down the news, get down into the details, and equip our supporters around the world with the tools that they need to make the case for Israel, including the messages that they won't necessarily be receiving from the mainstream media, but that they need to go out and fight for us as we fight for our lives.
Was this born out of the war and the need to present Israel's perspective?
Absolutely. When this war started, I was a private citizen. I started giving interviews as a private citizen. I quickly found myself in a position as a government spokesman, which I fulfilled for the first nearly 6 months of the war. And after I left the Prime Minister's office, I was looking for a new way to continue making an impact on the global conversation, and decided to take the team of volunteers who'd been working with me in the war to say, we're going to make our disadvantage an advantage. We're going to speak from civil society. We're not official. We don't represent the government or the army. We're speaking freely as private citizens, and we're going to continue fighting this war for Israel's legitimacy and its right to fight against the enemies threatening us with extermination that are still holding onto hostages. This isn't a war that is Netanyahu's war or the right-wing government's war. Hamas declared war on us. It's threatening to do October 7th again and again until Israel is destroyed. It's as if it could go back in history. If it could turn back time, it would commit the atrocities of October 7th again and again. They would if given half a chance. And we're fighting for global public opinion to stand by our side as we fight to free the hostages and bring Hamas to justice.
Israel is fighting a physical war, but are they losing the media war, do you think?
Hamas is winning the propaganda war. And it's winning the propaganda war because it has no problem lying, and those lies are amplified very quickly, including by UN officials and international NGOs that didn't say on October 7th Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas, and since then they've become critical about how Israel is doing it. They didn't want Israel to exercise self-defense against the Hamas terrorists and rapists at all. And they're now abusing their positions and their influence in public discourse to try to make it impossible for Israel to defend itself against Hamas. Just look at the recent allegation that Gaza was on the brink of imminent famine. Israel said, no, it's not. Far more food is entering now than before the war. We're facilitating so much aid, the UN is drowning under it, isn't able to distribute it. What are you talking about? But the headlines went around the world that Gaza was facing imminent famine. If those predictions were true, you would now be seeing 12,000 people a month dropping dead of starvation. It's not happening. And the UN just admitted in another report that the data simply isn't there to support the original predictions. But Israel now finds itself being accused in the International Court of Justice, no less, of trying to starve the Palestinians. What Hamas is doing is it is waging an information war that is designed to make good, ordinary, decent people in the West hate Israel. It's trying to manufacture suffering, images of suffering, to make people hate Israel so that they will join Hamas's jihad against Israel. Or when Iran's proxy armies around Israel try to destroy this country, they will stand idly by and say, the Israelis had it coming, because they're evil and irredeemably evil. Those are the stakes of the information war right now, and it's why it's so important to stand up to Hamas propaganda, to subject it to proper scrutiny, to understand the basic dynamics of Israel as a democratic state fighting for its life against a coalition of Iranian proxy armies, and not fall into the trap that Hamas is trying to set, of trying to paint Israel as being irredeemably evil, so that when the time is right to try to destroy this country, you stand by and say, well, the Jews had it coming.
Is there a lot of misinformation out there?
An enormous amount of misinformation. all the time, constantly, I keep coming back to the original example from the early days of the war. Hamas put out a press release saying that an Israeli airstrike had flattened a hospital and killed 500 people. The sun rose in the morning. It turned out that the hospital was still standing, and a piece of shrapnel from an Islamic Jihad rocket had hit the car park and killed dozens of people. But the lie had gone all the way around the world, and the media hasn't learnt its lesson and keeps amplifying these allegations. And really, the accusations that Israel's enemies throw against it are allegations of the worst crimes in human vocabulary: extermination, starvation, genocide. Nonsense, all of it, because Israel is fighting a just war against terrorists who are starving and raping and abusing and torturing and executing hostages in its terror tunnels. But Hamas knows, unfortunately, that it can make up any allegations of atrocities by Israel. And unfortunately, there are far too many people around the world who will automatically believe anything Hamas tells them and disbelieve anything Israel tells them, because it seems they are automatically primed to believe the worst about Israel and the Jews. And Hamas knows what buttons it's pressing.
Is there a lot of information out there that's from non-journalists and just somebody seeing it on TikTok and thinking that's the news?
People get their information on social media now, and therefore activists backed up by an army of bots funded by unsavory, undemocratic regimes are amplifying a huge amount of misinformation. People don't wait to get their news from New York Times, BBC, and I have plenty of criticism about these outfits as well, but at least they hold themselves to a certain standard of going through the work of a journalist, of checking the facts. Now, they don't always do that, but that's the mission that they take on themselves. People should not believe whatever they see on social media, because there are no filters and nothing to stop a lie from going all the way around the world. And that is an integral part of the Hamas propaganda war that is being waged against Israel to try to poison global public opinion against Israel, unfortunately, with the complicity of a lot of the international media. Because once these allegations gain traction on social media, then the international media feel they have to report on them. Even if they say we cannot independently verify this and this is coming from Hamas, a headline is a headline. And then you'll have a UN official expressing deep and grave concern over something that was, to begin with, a piece of Hamas propaganda that went viral because Al Jazeera, a Qatari mouthpiece, decided to write a story about it, and activists and bots on social media decided to go gaga for it too.
Genocide is a very powerful word. Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza?
No, obviously not, and it's deeply disappointing and distressing the lengths that people will go to try to prevent Israel from fighting, to bring back the hostages, and bring down the Hamas terror regime that is threatening to do October 7th again and again. People forget how this started. On October 7th, Hamas committed an act of genocide. It invaded Israel by air, land, and sea, and sent in death squads to murder as many people as it could, as brutally as it could. They would have killed many more than 1,200 people if our army hadn't stopped them. They burned people alive. They gagged them, and they bound them, and they mutilated parents in front of their children, children in front of their parents. They tried to massacre and slaughter as many people as they could, because their stated goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. And they're very clear about that genocidal intent. They committed a brutal massacre, promised to do it again and again, and retreated back into the Gaza Strip with over 250 hostages. And since then, Israel has been fighting a just war to free those hostages and dismantle Hamas's military so it can never again perpetrate such a barbaric massacre or target Israeli communities with rockets, as it has been doing for nearly 20 years already. And it's important that people remember those basic facts about this conflict. Israel is fighting to defend its people and doing everything in its power to minimize harm to Palestinian civilians. Unfortunately, having declared this war, Hamas then decided to fight this war inside densely populated areas, building a military tunnel network under schools and homes and hospitals and storing its military facilities inside civilian buildings, which mean that Israel faces an urban battlefield that no country in the world has ever had to confront. And Israel has had to innovate new ways to try to keep civilians safe when their own government, Hamas, deliberately puts them in harm's way. And that's because Hamas isn't using Palestinian civilians as human shields. It's using them as human sacrifices. Its leaders have been very clear that they will sacrifice as many martyrs as it takes to destroy Israel. Hamas is a death cult. It's a death cult run by fundamentalist, Islamist psychopaths. And we need the whole world to stand up against Hamas, because the more fake accusations are thrown Israel's way, the more Hamas says, we have no interest to wrap up this war. The more that global opinion is souring against Israel, we'll keep fighting, we'll let more people die, because we are winning by turning the world against Israel. And people don't understand the win that they are giving to Hamas and the incentive they are giving it to prolong this war unnecessarily by playing in with its information game and supporting the most horrific accusations against Israel, which are a form of projection, because it's Hamas that committed an act of genocide on October 7th and is openly vowing to do it again and again until we are all dead.
Israel has been taken to the International Criminal Court. Has this been fair?
No, it's a show trial, and you need no better example of how it's a show trial than the fact that the prosecutor surprised Israeli officials who learned about the charges from CNN. This is not how a professional court operates. The allegations themselves are outrageous. Extermination? Starvation? When Israel has opened new land routes and by air and sea for as much aid as possible to enter Gaza, when there are far more aid trucks entering now than there were before the war, to accuse Israel of trying to starve the people of Gaza, it's complete nonsense based on a complete distortion of the facts. The allegation that Israel is trying to exterminate the people of Gaza when we're trying to exterminate Hamas and do everything impossible to save Palestinian civilians from the consequences of their own leaders' decisions to declare this war on October 7th. And by the way, I think it's horrific that a recent poll showed that over half of people in Gaza think that the October 7th massacre was the correct decision by their government, Hamas. But the basic dynamics of this war are clear. Hamas declared war. Hamas declared war on Israel with the deadliest terror attack in world history after 9/11, and it took hostages. And we're fighting to defend ourselves by neutralizing the terror army threatening to do it again and again, and to bring back the hostages for whom there is no time left.
I imagine what the criminal court has done is giving the Israeli haters a justification to say, yeah, see, we're right, because they're taking them to court.
These international institutions are not, councils of omniscient sages. These are deeply political organizations. And when the world has 193 countries, most of them are not democracies. Most of them are tyrannies. Most of them are dictatorships. And so the fact that international organizations get hijacked by countries, the majority of countries in the world, which are not liberal countries, which are not democratic countries, which can agree on one thing, which is they don't like the Jews and they don't like Israel. When many undemocratic countries gang up on Israel, that doesn't mean that Israel's in the wrong. It means there's a problem with the rest of the world that's ganging up against it. And it's a shame that people take that veneer of legitimacy of these organizations instead of understanding that these are still deeply political organizations. The ICC, what good has it done against the leaders of Russia? Against the leaders of China, against the leaders of the many genuine dictatorships and brutal regimes around the world? Nothing. And instead they're taking action against the only democracy in the Middle East as it fights for its life to bring back the hostages and to neutralize the terror army threatening to do October 7th again and again. That's not justice. It's a perversion of justice.
We've seen students standing against Israel. Do they have any facts?
We see them not only standing against Israel, but openly protesting for the violent destruction of this country and for exporting terrorism around the world. There's a reason that the supreme leader of Iran called the student protesters a branch of the resistance front. Because when they chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, he understands that they mean destroy the state of Israel. When they chant globalize the intifada, he understands they don't mean let's wage a peaceful struggle. They mean kill Jews and Israelis wherever you find them, because the Intifada was a wave of suicide bombings and brutal terrorist attacks. These are young people who don't have a disagreement about this Israeli policy or that Israeli policy. They object at all to the existence of Israel. And in the name of progressive values, they want to take the only liberal country in the Middle East and hand it over to the darkest fundamentalist forces that our region knows. It's impossible to look at these protests and claim that they have any grip on reality, let alone the facts.
We have many hostages in Gaza. Has the world forgotten how they became hostages in the first place?
The world is forgetting the hostages. And the world is forgetting the hostages because there are many people who have an interest in making them forget it. They want this war to go away. They want Israel to stop the war and leave Hamas on its feet. And they understand that Israel cannot end this war while there are still hostages inside Gaza, that Israel is committed to getting them all back from the inhumane, satanic conditions that they are being held in. Immediately around the world, activists started putting up posters of hostages and people started ripping them down. They couldn't bear to see the face of an abducted baby, of a hostage child, because it told them this is the reason that Israel not only has a right, has a duty, a basic moral obligation to prosecute this war in order to get the hostages back. And so people who want this war to end with Hamas victorious, because they don't think that Israel should exist, so of course it shouldn't defend itself, want Israel to forget about the hostages, want the world to forget about the hostages. And we can't let them forget that, as Benny Gantz, now in the opposition, said, there were people who on October 6th went to sleep and woke up in their pajamas inside Gaza because they were abducted from their beds. They were abducted from their homes. They were abducted from a music festival. And people around the world, people with kids, teenagers, young adults, should ask how they would feel if their child went to a music festival and were abducted by jihadis who abducted them into some dark tunnel where they may be raping them or starving them or executing them. You would go to the ends of the earth to bring your child home to safety and their tormentors to justice. And that is what Israel is committed to doing.
Many countries have started recognizing Palestine as a Palestinian state. Is this rewarding terror? And how would you even facilitate that? Would you want to reward Hamas?
It's worse than that. The governments of Ireland, Norway, and Spain are not only rewarding the October 7th massacre, they're directly encouraging the next one. Instead of telling the Palestinians barbaric terrorism has absolutely no justification, it will lead you nowhere, it will set you back, they are telling them this will take your national cause forward. The government of Ireland is telling the Palestinians if they to abduct more Jewish babies. The government of Norway is telling the Palestinians to rape more Jewish women. The government of Spain is telling the Palestinians to burn more Jewish families alive because we will give you a prize. The Palestinians must not be allowed to think of October 7th as a national holiday that advanced their cause. Peace will come when we have a Palestinian leader who is brave enough to accept the legitimacy of the Jewish state, stand up to terrorism, and unfortunately when leaders reward the barbaric atrocities and burnings and rape and beheadings of October 7th, they are giving the Palestinians a reason to do this again. And I've been very clear. The blood and the ashes of the victims of the next October 7th massacre will be on the hands of the leaders who decided to reward the Palestinians for the most barbaric violence we have seen this century.
How did you get to hear about October the 7th, and did you know that you had to respond straight away?
7:30 in the morning. On a Saturday, the sirens started blaring in Tel Aviv. They'd been blaring in the rest of the country for an hour since 6:30 in the morning. And like everyone, I was asleep. I jumped out of bed. I ran into my building's rocket shelter. In Israel, many buildings will have a rocket shelter in the basement. All new apartments, by the way, built in the last 35 years, have their own rocket shelter in the apartment. And suddenly hearing explosions in the sky because Israel was under a massive missile attack from Gaza as part of the October 7th massacre. Part of the reason the war started was not only to bring back the hostages and stop another October 7th, is to neutralize Hamas's ability to keep shooting rockets at Israel's cities as if that's something normal that we just need to accept. It took time watching the news to understand the magnitude of what had happened. News about the massacre at the music festival only started dripping in the afternoon. And you see the ticker on the TV rising. 100 people feared dead, 200 feared dead, hundreds wounded, reports of 10 hostages taken into Gaza. And it took a few days for the shock to subside and understand the magnitude of the event that we were in, that Israel was now at war against the Iranian proxy army in Gaza.
What is your prayer for Israel at this time?
strength and resilience for its people as they look around the world and see so many people mobilizing against them who do not want them to defend themselves, who do not want them to live, to remember the power of love and solidarity within the Jewish world and from our allies around the world. And we know we have friends, and we know we have allies, and we know it is difficult for them to speak out because the other side will subject them to death threats and violent intimidation if they stick their necks out and fight for Israel. But we know that we're the good guys. We know that we're fighting for humanity, on the front lines of humanity, and that there are many people around the world who understand this basic battle between good and evil and understand why Israel has to win this war we didn't want, a war we didn't start, a war we didn't expect, but a war that we have to win. Because if we don't, there will be a next time, and it will be worse.
If people want to know more about news from an Israeli perspective, how can they find you on social media?
Can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Eylon Levy. They're also invited to follow the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's office. On Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, we have a daily briefing every day at 3 p.m. Israel time, 8 a.m. Eastern, in which they will have an opportunity to ask questions in a live Q&A, and my team of citizen spokespeople will do the best they can to get accurate, confirmed, verified information about the truth of what is happening in this war, so that they can then go forth and continue fighting for our right to defend ourselves against the barbaric terrorists threatening to do October 7th again and again and refusing to give us back the hostages they're torturing.
Okay, Eylon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.